5:12 in the morning, Springfield, Massachusetts. The city slept beneath a thin October fog, but inside the Springfield State Office building, something was about to shatter. Federal agents moved through the darkened hallways like ghosts. Their boots made no sound. Their weapons were raised. Their eyes locked on a single door at the end of the corridor, the door to the governor's Western Massachusetts office. A steel battering ram swung backward, then forward. The door exploded inward with a thunderous crash that echoed through the empty building like a gunshot, and what they found inside would expose one of the most disturbing government infiltrations in American history. 8 kilograms of pure cocaine, a loaded 9mm pistol, $38,500 in unmarked cash, and standing at the desk, frozen in the blue glow of tactical flashlights, was the man trusted to represent the people of Western Massachusetts. This wasn't a cartel warehouse. This was the seat of public power, and the man in handcuffs was supposed to be one of the good guys. What you're about to witness is not fiction. This is the story of how federal agents uncovered a drug network operating inside the Massachusetts government itself, how sworn officials betrayed their oaths for cartel money, how the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Drug Enforcement Administration launched simultaneous raids across the state, and what they discovered in the evidence vaults would shake the foundations of public trust. Over 1.2 tons of drugs seized, 129 firearms recovered, 47 suspects arrested in a single night, and the arrests that followed included the very people wearing badges. This is the Massachusetts corruption takedown, and it starts with one man's betrayal. 3 months before that morning raid, Springfield, Massachusetts looked like any other New England city preparing for autumn. Leaves turned golden on the tree-lined streets. Families walked their children to school. Local businesses opened their doors to the crisp morning air. But beneath the surface, something dark was spreading. Federal agents with the DEA had been tracking unusual patterns for nearly a year. Cocaine shipments moving through the Northeast Corridor, distribution routes that seemed to vanish into thin air, money flowing through channels that made no sense unless someone on the inside was clearing the path. The operation was codenamed Broken Shield, and for 14 months, investigators had been building a case against a criminal organization unlike any they had encountered. They called themselves Lon Wavis Anger, the New Blood, a paramilitary drug syndicate operating from New York to Maine. But what made them different from street level dealers was their strategy. They didn't just bribe low-level cops. They didn't just pay off warehouse workers. They infiltrated. They placed their people in positions of power, in government offices, in police precincts, in the very institutions designed to stop them. And for over a year, federal agents couldn't figure out how the drugs kept flowing despite their interdiction efforts. Every time they closed a route, another opened. Every time they made an arrest, the network adapted. It was as if someone was warning them, someone with access to information they shouldn't have. The breakthrough came in early September when a routine traffic stop in Worcester led to an unexpected discovery. A mid-level dealer, facing 20 years for possession with intent to distribute, made a decision that would unravel everything. He talked, and the name he gave investigators sent shockwaves through the federal task force. Lamar Cook, deputy director of the governor's office of Western Massachusetts, a man who had stood at press conferences talking about community safety. A man who had shaken hands with police chiefs and posed for photographs at anti-drug awareness events. A man who, according to this informant, was the gateway through which cartel cocaine entered Massachusetts government facilities. At first, investigators couldn't believe it. The accusation seemed impossible. But the more they dug, the more the impossible became undeniable. The DEA established a covert surveillance operation on Lamar Cook's movements. What they observed over the following weeks painted a disturbing picture. Cook maintained 2 lives with surgical precision. By day, he was the model public servant. Meetings with community leaders, budget reviews, correspondence with the governor's office. In Boston, his calendar was filled with the mundane responsibilities of bureaucratic leadership, but his nights told a different story. 3 times a week, Cook's personal vehicle was observed making stops at locations that had no connection to his official duties: a warehouse in Springfield's industrial district, a parking garage in Worcester, a storage facility outside Lowell that had been flagged in previous drug investigations but never definitively connected to criminal activity. The FBI's cyber unit obtained warrants for Cook's electronic communications. What they found on his encrypted devices confirmed their worst suspicions. Shipping manifests, dates, weights, coordinates. A meticulous record of 19 separate drug shipments over 14 months, each shipment weighing between 8 and 20 kilograms, each routed through official state channels. The postal system, municipal storage facilities, government mailrooms. Cook wasn't just accepting bribes. He had transformed the infrastructure of Massachusetts government into a drug distribution network. But the most chilling discovery came from the financial records. Over $11.3 million had flowed through a nonprofit organization claiming to support community youth outreach. The donor names were fabricated. The money came from drug sales. And that same nonprofit had made payments to dozens of local officials. Speaking fees, campaign contributions, security consulting retainers. The rot went deeper than one man, much deeper. When the evidence was presented to the federal task force commander, the room fell silent. On a whiteboard covered with photographs and connecting lines, they could see the shape of something they had never encountered. A network that had corrupted police officers, court clerks, sheriffs, deputies, and municipal administrators across the state. Lon Wavis anger hadn't just infiltrated Massachusetts. They had built a shadow. Government inside it. And now federal agents faced a decision. Move fast and risk alerting the network, or wait and watch more poison flow into communities, schools, and homes. They chose to move. What happened next was one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations in Massachusetts history. 14 targets, 14 minutes, no warning, no escape. If you want to see how federal agents dismantled this network, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because what they found inside those warehouses was far worse than cocaine, and the arrests that followed included names that will shock you. Now let me show you how this operation unfolded. Inside the Federal Command Center, investigators worked through the night piecing together the complete architecture of Lon Wavis Angry's operation. For primary distribution corridors ran through Massachusetts, each disguised inside legitimate logistics companies. Trucks carrying produce, hardware, and construction supplies moved freely across state lines, with sealed containers that no one questioned. The cocaine Lamar Cook received was only one endpoint in a pipeline stretching from the Mexican border through Ohio, into New York, and finally settling in Boston's commuter belt. But the drugs were only part of the operation. Federal analysts identified two private casinos, small, exclusive, invitation only, no neon signs, no crowds, just quiet back rooms where gambling chips became cash and cash became electronic deposits routed through shell companies registered in Delaware and Puerto Rico. The money laundering was sophisticated, clean, nearly invisible. And then there was the enforcement arm. Lon Wavis Anger maintained a network of corrupted law enforcement officers across the state, patrolmen who looked the other way during transport runs, deputies who provided advance warning of investigations, court clerks who buried paperwork and delayed prosecutions. The list of compromised positions grew longer with every file investigators opened. And the question that haunted them was terrifying in its implications. How many other states had networks like this operating right now? The task force commander made the call at 2:30 in the morning. They would strike at dawn, simultaneous raids on 14 locations across Massachusetts, every target hit within minutes of each other to prevent any warning from reaching the network. Operation Broken Shield was about to become the largest drug enforcement action the state had ever seen. 3:50 in the morning. Inside a federal command post just outside Worcester, screens glowed with red markers on a digital map of Massachusetts. Each marker represented a target: storage units, safe houses, warehouses, distribution points. Apartments where gang members slept among otherwise normal neighborhoods. Federal agents from the FBI, DEA, and state tactical teams assembled in staging areas across the region. Body armor was checked, communications tested, weapons loaded. For many of these agents, this wasn't their first high-risk operation. But the scope of tonight was different. They weren't just hitting drug dealers. They were dismantling a system that had corrupted the institutions they had sworn to protect. In the pre-dawn darkness, team leaders gathered their units for final briefings. The targets were explained, the entry plans reviewed, the potential for armed resistance emphasized. Lon Wavis Anger wasn't a street gang. They were a paramilitary organization. Their members had military training, their safe houses were fortified, and they had proven in other states that they would fight rather than surrender. Every agent in that staging area understood what could happen in the next hour. At 4:03 in the morning, a single message appeared on secured screens across Massachusetts. Action, all units. And then, everything moved at once. In Lowell, armored vehicles rolled through the fog toward a two-story auto shop that had been under surveillance for weeks. The building looked abandoned from the outside, rusted signs, weeds growing through cracked concrete, the perfect cover. Agents lined up at the steel door. A tactical operator stepped forward with the breeching. Ram, 3, 2, 1. The door swung inward with a deafening crash. A white flash of stun grenade lit up the interior. 3 men inside reached for weapons mounted on the wall, but they never made it. Agents poured through the smoke, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. Within 45 seconds, all 3 suspects were face down on the concrete floor, hands zip-tied behind their backs, and, behind them, stacked against the wall like construction materials, were 200 pounds of cocaine and 90 pounds of fentanyl, wrapped, sealed, ready for distribution. At the same moment, across the state in Springfield, another team breached a warehouse disguised as an agricultural distributor. The tarps covering the loading dock had fooled passing traffic for months, but they couldn't fool thermal imaging. Inside, agents found a processing operation in full swing, cutting tables, digital scales, vacuum sealing equipment, and 40 kilograms of uncut cocaine waiting to be divided for street sale. But the most intense operation was unfolding in Worcester. The target was a residential garage connected to a network of safe houses. Surveillance cameras on the street picked up the approaching vehicles, and within seconds, suspects inside were grabbing rifles and attempting to flee through the back alley. A DEA agent ducked behind a concrete barrier as automatic gunfire erupted from an upper window. Muzzle flash lit up the darkness. Rounds sparked off the pavement. The tactical team was pinned. Then the sound changed. A Black Hawk helicopter appeared overhead, its rotor blades shaking the rooftops. A spotlight carved through the darkness, illuminating the fleeing suspects in blinding white light. "Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." The voice thundered from the helicopter's loudspeaker. But the suspects kept firing. The alley erupted into close quarters. Combat, short bursts, controlled movements. 2 FBI agents advanced through the chaos with disciplined precision. 9 minutes of sustained engagement, and then, silence. 3 suspects lay motionless on the pavement. 2 others emerged with their hands raised, their faces pale with the realization that every escape route they had planned was gone by the time the sun rose over Massachusetts. The scope of Operation Broken Shield was undeniable. 47 arrests across 14 locations, 1.2 tons of narcotics seized, 129 firearms recovered, including illegally modified assault rifles and foreign military imports, dozens of phones and encrypted ledgers filled with payment logs and coded communication. News helicopters circled overhead. Residents gathered on sidewalks, watching in disbelief, and across the state, one truth became inescapable. This was no small operation. This was an empire, and it had been operating in plain sight, right next to homes, schools, and businesses. But the raids were only the beginning. 129 firearms, 1.2 tons of drugs, 47 suspects in custody. And the evidence collected that morning would lead to something even more disturbing, because the real question wasn't how many dealers they had caught. It was how many badges were about to be collected. If you're following this story, drop a comment below. Shield or silence, which side would you stand on if you discovered corruption? In your own community? Now let me show you what happened when federal agents turned their attention to the people who wore uniforms. Act 3 Part B. The internal purge. 10:45 to 12:30 at dawn. Unmarked federal vans rolled toward police precincts, municipal buildings, and administrative offices across Massachusetts. These weren't the explosive entries of the earlier raids. These were quiet, deliberate, surgical. Because the targets weren't cartel members. They were colleagues inside a district station in Worcester. Officers gathered for their morning briefing like any other day. Coffee cups in hand, complaints about the overnight shift, normal conversation about normal things. Then federal agents stepped through the front doors, not with weapons raised, with warrants. A lieutenant who had served 23 years stared in disbelief as his badge was removed. A detective once praised for reducing neighborhood drug crime lowered his head as his own handcuffs clicked around his wrists. A procurement official froze when agents opened a filing cabinet and lifted out envelopes of staged community outreach. Funds that had been diverted to cartel accounts for months. 17 police officers, 2 municipal administrators, 1 state procurement advisor, all taken into custody before noon. There were no shouts, no excuses, no dramatic confrontations, just the heavy silence of people realizing that the system they had exploited had finally caught up with them. Some officers in the precinct looked away as their colleagues were escorted out. Some stared at the floor. Some watched with pain in their eyes, because they had suspected something was wrong. They had noticed the unusual behaviors, the unexplained absences, the sudden wealth that didn't match a public servant's salary, but they had never believed the betrayal ran this deep. Outside the precinct, citizens gathered in small crowds. Some were angry, demanding to know how this had happened. Some were heartbroken, watching men they had trusted being placed in patrol cars. One elderly man stood apart from the others. He held a folded American flag in his weathered hands. The same flag he had donated to the precinct years earlier, after his son's funeral. He didn't shout. He didn't demand answers. He simply watched, and in his eyes was something worse than anger, disappointment, because it wasn't strangers who had poisoned his neighborhood. It was men who had sworn to protect it. Inside the Boston Federal Analysis Center, walls were covered with photographs, documents, and connection diagrams. The evidence collected across 14 raid sites was overwhelming. Analysts worked shoulder to shoulder with financial crime specialists and cyber forensics teams. Every file seized was cataloged, every hard drive cloned, every encrypted communication decrypted line by line. As the data unfolded, a complete picture of Lon Wavis Angry's Massachusetts operation emerged. The network had processed an estimated $220 million in annual profits. Thousands of households had been touched by the drugs they distributed, and the corruption they had cultivated reached into institutions that most citizens trusted without question. But what disturbed investigators most wasn't the scale. It was the strategy. Lon Wavis Anger hadn't built their empire through overwhelming force. They had built it through patience, through careful recruitment, through identifying weaknesses in people and systems, and exploiting them methodically over years. A traffic cop who needed money for his daughter's medical bills, a court clerk drowning in credit card debt, a procurement officer whose gambling habit had spiraled out of control. Each one had been approached, each one had been offered a solution to their problems, and each one had been gradually pulled deeper into the network until escape seemed impossible. This was how cartels operated now, not with violence alone, but with psychology, with patience, with an understanding that the greatest threat to American institutions wasn't an army at the border. It was a handshake in a conference room, a deposit in a bank account, a favor asked and a favor owed. By nightfall, the federal task force had connected the Massachusetts network to operations in 7 other states. The tentacles of Lon Wavis Anger stretched from the northeast corridor down through the mid-Atlantic and into the southeast. What began as a single investigation in Springfield had revealed something far larger. A nationwide infiltration strategy targeting state and local governments across America. The governor of Massachusetts addressed the state from the steps of the State House at 6 in the evening. His voice didn't boom. It was measured, controlled, like someone holding the weight of a cracked foundation and trying to keep it from collapsing. He spoke of betrayal, of the sacred trust between public servants and the people they serve, of the anger he felt knowing that men and women wearing government badges had poisoned their own communities. But he also spoke of accountability, of the officers and agents who had worked for months to expose this corruption, of the difficult truth that healing only begins when infection is removed. If the badge is used to harm the people, he said, then the shield is broken. And when the shield is broken, we repair it. We do not look away. In the days that followed, the Integrity Review Task Force was established. An independent bureau with full authority to audit police departments, government offices, financial transfers, and procurement chains tied to public agencies across Massachusetts. The mission was clear: restore trust where trust had been taken, rebuild institutions where institutions had been corrupted, protect communities where communities had been deceived. It would not be fast, it would not be simple, but it had begun. And this brings me to the question that haunts every investigator who worked this case. What do we do when the people wearing badges become the threat? How do we rebuild trust in institutions that have been corrupted from within? I want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments below, because this story isn't just about Massachusetts. It's about every community in America that believes it's immune to infiltration until it discovers it isn't. When the last ledger was logged, when the final badges were collected and sealed into evidence bags. Massachusetts stood at a crossroads. Not celebration, not relief, something heavier, something that demanded reflection, because what unfolded here was never just about cocaine or cash or seized weapons. It was about trust, the fragile, essential trust between the people and the institutions sworn to protect them. Lamar Cook's arrest had seemed like a single scandal. Now it was understood for what it truly was, a warning. A glimpse of how close the darkness had come to consuming everything. But the same state that had been infiltrated also fought back, not with denial, not with silence, with relentless exposure and accountability. The cartels do not vanish in one operation. Corruption does not die in a single raid. Trust does not rebuild itself overnight. But vigilance matters. Accountability matters. Refusing to look away, that matters. Massachusetts was only the beginning. The investigation continues. The networks stretch across state lines. And somewhere, right now, another public official is being approached with an offer they think no one will ever discover. The question is, will we be watching? If you believe this story needs to be heard, hit the like button so the algorithm shares it with others who need to see it. Subscribe if you want to follow what happens next, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the war for integrity is not finished, it's only beginning.